Leaves Graham.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. The bill before the House relies heavily on subsequent regulations. That's not by itself a reason to not support the legislation, but it would be good if the government was able in its reply to outline, or at least provide a broad outline of its intention in relation to those regulations. We have seen a regrettable trend in recent years for this particular government to provide legislation that sketches a broad outline with many of the finer details to be coloured in later. And of course the problem that presents for the Parliament is that it's then only left with a very blunt stick of disallowance, and even then only within a short time frame.
Much of this is not disallowed.
I acknowledge that interjection. Much of what is to be done here is not disallowable, but to the extent it is, it provides the Parliament only with a blunt object, or a blunt instrument, where it cannot help craft the solutions that need to be addressed. And of course the problem with disallowance is that it can of course rob legislation of its ability to operate, so of course the Parliament would be slow in disallowing regulations if they are necessary to the functioning of the planning system in particular. So we would like the government to provide some greater detail about why it's chosen to withhold so much of the detail until a later time. The bill proposes a system of local strategic statements required to be prepared by councils every 7 years, and it's important to understand how those statements will fit in with the work of the Greater Sydney Commission and how they relate or can relate to transport infrastructure proposals being developed by government itself. There's no point having all these different bodies working at cross purposes, and we need to understand better how the government intends that the parts will work together. The bill is also said to provide a greater level of safeguards for the community in relation to decisions made by private certifiers. Again, this should be expanded upon by the government to assure the Parliament and the members in this place and the other place that these safeguards are effective and meet the reasonable requirements of local government. And the bill also addresses development contributions, special infrastructure contributions and voluntary planning agreements. And given the widespread practices of councils seeking to be paid some proportion of a value uplift of a rezoning, the Parliament should be in a position to understand whether such practices are always appropriate and how the needs of local communities can be better addressed in those situations. So there are a number of, I guess, unanswered questions, or questions still left unaddressed by the bill and by the government's contribution, and to the extent the government is able to do so subsequent to this debate, we would invite them to provide that greater level of detail and certainty for the community.
No one else